This is the most reproduced photograph on the planet, on t-shirts, on walls, on flags, but the man behind that gaze was to some a hero, and to others an executioner. His simply as Chi, a doctor, then a guerrilla, a minister, and finally a legend. His story is one of fierce idealism and of spilled blood. June 14, 1928. In the Argentine city of Rosario, he was born the eldest child of a middle-class family, with Spanish and Irish blood in his veins. At just 2 years old, he was diagnosed with asthma, an illness that would haunt him for life. Confined to bed again and again, he escaped into books, devouring Marx, Freud, and the poetry of Neruda. He refused to let the illness define him. He played rugby, mastered chess, and climbed mountains. That stubborn, risk-hungry spirit was there from the very start. In Buenos Aires, he began to study medicine. In 1952, at just 23, he and his friend Alberto climbed onto a battered old motorcycle they called the Mighty One and set out to cross an entire continent. This journey would change him forever. In the Andes, he saw the misery of miners, the hunger of farm workers, the crushing of native peoples with his own eyes. The injustice he had only read about now had a human face, and it filled him with a deep anger. In Peru, he volunteered at a colony for lepers. On his birthday, he swam across the river that separated the patients from the staff, just to stand on their side. His compassion was slowly turning into politics. Among the stones of Machu Picchu, he thought about the past and the future of an exploited continent. Medicine was no longer enough. His patient was not one man. It was a whole continent, and it was sick. By 1954, he was in Guatemala. Its leftist president was handing the idle land of American fruit companies to poor farmers. To Ernesto, this was hope itself. But a coup backed by the CIA tore that government down. Ernesto watched an elected government strangled at gunpoint. His conclusion was cold and final. Against empire, the peaceful road was a dead end. Only the gun would be heard. He fled to Mexico City. There he met a young, exiled Cuban revolutionary named Fidel Castro. They talked through an entire night. By dawn, Ernesto had joined his revolution. The Cubans nicknamed him Chi, an Argentine slang word he used constantly. He trained under a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, and despite his asthma, he became one of the toughest fighters among them. At the end of 1956, 82 men crammed onto a small yacht called the Granma and landed in Cuba. Batista's soldiers ambushed them almost the moment they touched land. Only a handful survived the slaughter, fleeing into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, and in that hopeless moment, Chi chose between a crate of medicine and a crate of ammunition. He chose the ammunition. The doctor had become a soldier. With his courage, his discipline, and his ruthlessness, he rose fast. Fidel gave him the highest rank, comandante. With a small column, he bled Batista's massive army dry, through ambush after ambush. In the land he captured, he built schools, a hospital, and a rebel radio station. He wanted to spread the revolution not only with bullets but with ideas. Yet in those same mountains, he wore another face. Deserters and men he judged to be traitors, he often executed with his own hand. He saw this not as cruelty, but as the price of revolution. To Chi, victory came not from mercy, but from an iron will. At the end of 1958, Chi marched on the city of Santa Clara. With just 300 men, he derailed an armored military train and seized the city. This daring victory broke the back of the regime. January 1st, 1959. Batista fled the country in the night. When Chi and the revolutionaries rode into Havana, the streets overflowed with joy. The 30-year-old doctor was now the legendary commander of a revolution. But the scene that followed the victory is Chi's most controversial. Fidel made him commander of Havana's La Cabaña fortress. His task, to judge the men of the old regime. In these revolutionary tribunals, hundreds were judged swiftly. Among them were Batista's torturers, but also ordinary opponents. Chi oversaw the executions. Some he personally approved. The number is said to run into the hundreds. Revolutionary justice, he said, is not the justice of lawyers, but of the people. His defenders call it the unavoidable reckoning of a bloody dictatorship. His critics call it cold-blooded slaughter without a fair trial. Chi was no longer just a soldier, he was a statesman. He became head of Cuba's central bank and minister of industry. He even signed the banknotes simply Chi, his way of showing his contempt for money. He launched a vast literacy campaign, cutting illiteracy nearly to zero in a single year. Free healthcare and free education for all. These are legacies the revolution is still proud of today. On weekends, he cut sugarcane and hauled sacks at the docks as a volunteer. He believed in the new man, a person who works not for money or self-interest, but purely for the good of society. But this ideal often crashed into reality. He rejected material incentives and tried to plan everything from the center. Production fell, shortages grew, moral enthusiasm could not fill an empty stomach. And the dark side remained. Labor camps were built for dissidents, for priests, and for homosexuals. She was among the architects of this one-party order. The promise of freedom had become rigid control. In 1962, the world came to the very brink of nuclear war over Soviet missiles in Cuba. She was radical enough to argue the missiles should stay, and if necessary, be fired. For him, revolution meant embracing death. In 1964, he stood at the United Nations, condemning imperialism, exploitation, and racism. The next year in Algiers, he even accused Cuba's own ally, the Soviet Union, of being complicit in that exploitation. She was no man of the desk. In 1965, he suddenly vanished. He left Fidel a farewell letter, gave up all his posts and his citizenship, and went to Africa, to the Congo, to export the revolution. The Congo was a disaster. He could not unite the local rebels. Disease ravaged his men. The war was lost. This is the history of a failure, he wrote in his diary, but defeat could not stop him. Next came Bolivia. In 1966, he shaved his head, disguised himself, and slipped secretly into the country. His goal, to ignite a guerrilla fire that would create many Vietnams across the continent. But this time, everything went wrong. The Bolivian peasants did not join him. They saw him as a foreign adventurer. The local Communist Party pulled its support. His small band was left alone in the jungle with hunger and disease. His diary filled with despair. The Bolivian army, backed by CIA-trained ranger units, closed in step by step. On October 8, 1967, he was captured, wounded, in a ravine near La Higuera. He was locked inside a tiny village schoolhouse. The next day, the order came from the Bolivian government and from Washington: execute him without trial. His last words, they say, were, "Shoot, coward, you are only going to kill a man." His body was flown to Velegrand and displayed to journalists in a laundry room. They cut off his hands for identification and buried him in a secret grave. His killers believed they had ended the legend. But the legend was only beginning. That single photograph, taken in 1960, Corda's heroic guerrilla, swept the world after his death. It became the universal symbol of rebellion, of youth, of defiance. The rebellious youth of 1968 made him their banner. From Paris to Mexico City, student movements carried his face. She had become the symbol of refusing to bow to injustice. And here is the irony. The man who gave his life to destroy capitalism became one of the faces capitalism sells the most. On t-shirts, on mugs, in advertisements, his rebellion became a fashion item. To just as many people, he is a romanticized killer. A man who shot opponents without trial, defended labor camps, and served a one-man regime. To them, wearing chi means forgetting his victims. In 1997, his bones were found in Bolivia, brought back to Cuba, and laid in a mausoleum. The truth lies somewhere between the hero and the murderer. She was neither a flawless saint nor a common criminal. He was a man ready both to die and to kill for the utopia he believed in. And perhaps the real question is this: does giving your life for a cause make you a hero, or does the blood spilled for it stain everything? Ernesto Che Guevara packed a continent's hopes and its nightmares into 39 years of life. The answer now belongs to history and to you.